If you're clicking on this video, then you already know how much tragedy there is in the Like a Dragon series. And for a guy like Kiryu Kazuma, that certainly is the case. He's got a whole brigade of tragedy in his story that is also part of his legacy. With that in mind, this is episode 3 of my Tanimura Files series, and today we're only going to focus on two guys from two different eras of the series. That being Yakuza 0's Tachibana Tetsu, and Yakuza 3's Rikiya Shimabukuro. This is episode 3 of the Tanimura Files, because I'm still having to work in tandem with that sinister Mr. Tackerdrop Films. But for episode 3, I'm going to talk about two of Kiryu-san's greatest allies from before my time meeting him, that being a certain man named Tachibana, and another certain man named Rikiya. So, join me today as we go into this case file of the most tragic allies of Kiryu Kazuma. The 1980s were prime time for real estate, and the metal-armed Batman known as Tachibana, aka Li Hao, was owning the industry with his own Tachibana real estate company. One thing that always stuck out to me was the scene where he straight up turns off the power in Kamurocho, like some kind of X-Men character. It's one of those Like a Dragon scenes that's never really brought up again in the story, but visually it illustrates to us how much power Tachibana has with real estate alone. At the same time, this shows his ambitions for wanting to grab Empty Lot's deeds from the Tojo clan and Omi alliance. I suppose that was well said. Well, I gotta add that the citizens of Little Asia, from my personal experience, have always been, well, under the stomping heels of the Yakuza. Even though the Yakuza have supposedly defended Japan. But in this case, the two Tachibana siblings were definitely the result of a violent act by the goddamn Yakuza. And I can certainly see why this helped shape Kiryu as a man. A young man in his 20s willing to rise and be a true, noble character. And well, I certainly feel bad for old Tachibana. Alright, Tanimura, let's jump ahead a bit and compare the ink of these fellas. Tachibana has a bat tattoo on his left forearm, being a bat with holes in his wings. I think this makes sense considering he's missing his right arm from a health condition, and has a lot of skeletons in his closet due to his upbringing. Born as Li Hao in China, to a Japanese mother, he grew up facing racial prejudice alongside his sister, Xiao Kuai, aka Makoto Makimura. Later on, we learn that their grandfather on their mother's side was the original Empty Lot owner, Genzo Makimura. Now, we don't usually see arm tattoos in the series unless they're accompanied by other tattoos on the body, but in the case of Tachibana, I think it's awesome and parallels Wen Hai Li's arm tattoos based in Chinese mythology. And it's cool that both of those characters have some connection to Makoto herself. Anyway, let's add on to this and see how Tachibana's bat differs from evil Oda's bat tattoo. Oda's, as we can assume, is to be more like the complete ones we'd imagine from their own gang, like that design we see when the characters in the plot are trying to go after that old gang, as it's a bat that is complete with fire and not at all withered. However, one other detail I like about Tachibana's bat is that instead of being surrounded by strands of fire, he's instead accompanied by 2 pairs of leaves. Maybe a few more if you count some of the background detail. That more peaceful aspect, that nature aspect, plus his damaged wings, says a lot about not only his rough upbringing, but also Tachibana's state of mind. He's a guy that has lots of ghosts in his closet, such as his guilt for leaving Makoto back in China when he was only 15.
so he left her at a pretty young age in their relationship. The story of Yakuza 0 really picks up once we see in later chapters the reveal that there's more to Tachibana than him just being a mere client to Kiryu and providing him sanctuary and a job. There's just more to the guy. If there's one important detail that Tachibana has in relation to our boy Rikiya, it would be their connection to big, mysterious daddy Shintaro Kazuma. For Tachibana, he was a prime real estate agent working with Shintaro, even though Shintaro was in jail, in order to retrieve the deed to the empty lot and prevent the ugly mug Sohei Dojima from rising to power in the Tojo clan. For Rikiya, he was determined to find the man who shot his big King Caesar daddy, Shigeru Nakahara, and the only lead he had was a sketch of Beautiful Eyes twin man Joji Kazama, done by Saki. Man, what the hell am I writing? Anyway.
Man, that Oda guy sure seems like a real bastard. Kinda reminds me of Katsuragi in a way.
You need a stamina spark or something, Tanimura. Get energized. Anyway, I think it's cool that both of these characters, Tachibana and Rikiya, tie back to Shintaro Kazuma in some way. It relates to the ongoing plots back to Kiryu himself in a personal way, while also giving him a spiritual obstacle to overcome. In Yakuza 0, the stand-in Tojo clan chairman at the time asked Kiryu if he knew the kind of man Shintaro Kazuma was, to which Kiryu replies, not really, old man. That was when Tachibana was giving the Tojo clan 10 billion yen just to get Kiryu's head off the target chopping board. With that in mind, the old chairman tells Kiryu that Shintaro is a man worth 10 billion, and back in the day he would have easily paid that amount of money to have Shintaro on his side. And then he looks at Kiryu and says he's looking forward to seeing if Kiryu himself is truly worth that amount of money. It's a small detail, but I think it encapsulates Kiryu's journey in Yakuza 0, especially to the extent that he fights for the Tachibana siblings.
Well, now I need to dive into Rikiya, a man that Kiryu met before he met me. And well, let's just say he truly was a defender of Okinawa and Ryukyu.
Then you get Yakuza 3, where Kiryu is a much older man than he was in 0, of course, and is now haunted by his past, when Kazama seemingly comes back to life and starts shooting those close to him, Daigo and Shigeru. Of course, Widow ends up being his almost twin brother, Kazama's younger brother, and this plot point alongside Rikiya's determination to find Joji shows how far Kiryu's come in his journey as a mentor. I've said in an older video about Joji that his inclusion was a way for Kiryu to physically and spiritually move on from Shintaro's shadow, and that still applies here. Whether it's Yakuza 0 or Yakuza 3, Kiryu's always been the kind of guy to forge his own path, even if the entire criminal underworld is against him. That's because no matter Shintaro Kazuma's mysterious history or parental influence, Kiryu's always had that innate trait of following his dragon instincts, if you will, and defending those who can't. This brings me to Rikiya's Viper Irizumi, and you better not call it a snake, cause you'll piss him off. It's a viper, damn it. Rikiya's Viper is a native animal to Okinawa, and from that first confrontation in downtown Ryukyu, early on in the game, we get to see how much Rikiya devotes himself to his home turf. He wears that Viper with pride, and it's satisfying to compare and contrast his first encounter of Kiryu to their bromance brawl later on in that wrestling ring outside Morning Glory. Good stuff. The Viper may look sinister at first, but it's only because it bears its fangs against evildoers. It's also accompanied by nature in the form of some Okinawan plants, giving it something in common with Tachibana's damaged bat with the leaves. I'd even go as far as to add that both of these inks have quote-unquote something missing to them. The holes in Tachibana's wings reflect his past and longing to reunite with his sister Makoto, while Rikiya's Viper is explicitly missing the dot on its eye. If there's one thing I miss from classic Yakuza games, it would be sub-stories that have a fancy cutscene or two that you get from the main story. For Rikiya, that'd be the dotting the I sub-story in Kamurocho, where we get to see the legendary Ink Man Beard Master Udabori, the same fella who created Kiryu and Nishiki's Irazumis years ago. What a beast. The way Rikiya still acts almighty and prideful of his Okinawa Viper, his heritage, still gets a few chuckles out of me. Just look at Udabori's reaction. Like, man, Rikiya, give the old guy a break. Udabori's art is still incredible, you know. Nonetheless, this sub-story gives a very sweet layer of depth to Kiryu and Rikiya's dynamic. I like to imagine Kiryu took Rikiya here after their discussion about Kashiwagi while on the swings and that one park in Kamurocho. During that discussion, Rikiya let Kiryu vent about losing Kashiwagi and what kind of legend he was, cold noodles and such. And I think that it was here that led to Kiryu deciding to have Udabori finish Rikiya's Irizumi by adding the I. It just feels like something that Kiryu would do. A friendly exchange, if you will.
Damn. It's always the innocent that get taken out in these Yakuza clan wars.
Yeah. Well, Tanimura, you sure are a lot gloomier today.
Really now, Mr. Tiger's Red Phillips. So you're telling me that Kiryu-san helped this Rikiya fellow finish his Irizumi? I guess you can really find anything in Kamurocho.
Just must be the episode's content. Anyway, Rikiya finally getting the eye on his Viper finished ends up working symbolically for his character's fate. Throughout all of Yakuza 3, Rikiya becomes a beloved character for a reason. He's that sort of sidekick that grows on you and has a catchphrase you can't forget. Anarchy! Just look at the way Rikiya jump-scared me here at Morning Glory. Check it out right now. And then when you go back to Yakuza 0 and look at Tachibana as a character, he comes off as rather cold but highly intelligent and intuitive during his first couple chapters. However, by the time he saves Kiryu from Enema Boxing Man Kuze by running the old man over with his sports car...
Yeah, I certainly would have hated to met this Kuze guy.
We then get to see a more vulnerable side of Tachibana with his health condition that made him lose an arm years ago. The effects of the condition still bother him, to the point that later on he overextends himself during the Tojo Clan HQ long battle. It's cool that he was also an ally during combat like Rikiya was. Furthermore, I'll never forget the reveal that Tachibana was the actual man with the bat tattoo that Majima was looking after alongside Lee. During this whole time, oh man, just looking back at it, talk about storytelling that paid off, huh? Later on, we get two parallel scenes that I see as some of RGG's best ways to show the longing between two characters, that being Makoto and Tachibana. First, there's a scene in a club where Kiryu is letting Makoto vent after saving her, where she then describes what it's like to grow up in China and the other hardships that came with moving to Japan. As a mixed person myself, I can tell you, it's not always easy. We get to see her perspective as she breaks down about her brother, and also provides a growing Kiryu a moment to inspire her. Lift her up and tell her to hang on. It's not too different from how Kiryu diffused the Nishiki situation earlier in the forest. Likewise, a few scenes later we get to hear Tachibana's angle when he's on the hospital bed in Little Asia. The way he refers to Makoto by her birth name is very tender, and shows that beneath all the real estate nonsense, Tachibana is still a guy with regrets and actual aspirations that are human. And like with Makoto's soliloquy, Kiryu lifts Tachibana up and sees the best in him. For a prequel, Yakuza 0 certainly had wonderful, subtle ways of making Kiryu the guy we all know him to be later on. Sadly, however, that territory also comes with tragedy. Kiryu's lost a lot over the years, plenty of other characters I could mention. For today though, Yakuza 0 and Yakuza 3 both have some of the most heartbreaking climatic scenes that really put you in Kiryu's shoes. I won't show the entire footage for either of these sad death scenes since it's something that's better just to put the controller down and watch yourself when you replay the game, but they simply pull at the heartstrings. Stop cutting the onions, damn it! Who's cutting the onions? Who's cutting the onions anyway? Is it you, Bacchus? Oh, it's probably Kanai. More so, those two scenes also highlight Kiryu's determination to finish the fight in the final chapter of these respective games. The tragedy of these characters in turn become determination of Kiryu and the player alike, as it's up to you to stop these antagonists and restore order to ordinary life. That might just be part of the magic that is the Like a Dragon series, a perfect melody of narrative and gameplay alike. A reason to keep going in the face of tragedy.
Man, it's another rainy day in the big city, out in Tokyo. And no one's answering me. I hope Kiryu-san can save me. But it looks like I'll save myself. And there's nothing wrong with that. And I gotta say that after learning about today's events, a lot has shaped old Kiryu, Mr. Kaze, as a character, as a man. And I can only hope to keep doing that myself. Inspiration from old foes, like old Sakuchi, for instance. That fight with him truly shaped my identity as officer of the law. And well, I guess, as for you, Mr. Tiger Drop, I guess you need me for another one, don't you? Gotta find some way to get out of here.
Well. That wraps up this episode. But stay tuned for the next one, episode 4 of the Tanimura Files. Next time we're gonna get sketchy, we're gonna get schemy, we might even get sexy. Thanks for watching. I've been Tiger Drop Films. Like and subscribe if you feel like it, and I'll see you in the next one. Mwah.